Slide 16. The Modern Era. Notable transgender people from the modern era. Slide 17. Saint Marinos the monk, holding his child. Current era 715 to current era 750. Likewise, some medieval people used habits, meaning monks or nuns' habits, to physically affect their bodies, for example by covering it from sight, and to perform social effects such as modesty. A historical example of habits being used for gender transition comes to us through the story of the life of Saint Marinos the monk. Marinos is an early Christian figure who has been canonized both in the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox churches. According to tradition, passed down through story, relics and shrines, Marinos was assigned female at birth, but chose to enter a monastery and live as a monk. As he was contemplating his transition, his father warned him that his body, especially his genitals, would get him in trouble. Yet Marinos responded to this concern by putting on a monk's habit which not only covered over his genitals with clothing, but covered over any sort of reproductive sexual life with the veil of celibacy. After all, if monks were to be modest and abstain from sexual encounters, what difference did it make what form of genitalia he had under his habit? Funny enough, Marinos was ejected from the monastery for a time. He was kicked out not because he had a vagina, and this was only discovered after his death, but because it was believed that he possessed a penis and that he used it to impregnate a local girl. In fact, after the child was born, Marinos was given the boy to raise as his own. At this point, if Marinos' clothing were merely a disguise, it had long since lost its usefulness. If his identity as a monk and as a man was not so important, then Marinos could have easily taken off his habit and revealed his genitals to demonstrate his innocence. Yet Marinos held onto his monk's habit and male identity. He took on the additional role of father until eventually he was allowed back into the monastery along with his adopted son. In the end, Marinos remained a man, a monk, and father until his death, all because of the clothing which had allowed him to transition, and which he would not surrender even in moments of danger. Eleanor Reichner, current era 1394. Records exist for Eleanor from 625 years ago, but it's not clear when she was born. In 1394, she was arrested in London for prostitution and sodomy. There is not a lot of information about her since she lived such a long time ago, but this is what we do know. She presented female and worked as an embroiderer and a barmaid, typically only jobs held by women at that time. She also worked as a sex worker. She had relationships with women and men, but mostly men. Eleanor's identity has been erased or categorized by cisgender heteronormative historians who refer to her male name being used on some court documents, as if medieval court clerks are above dead naming. These boneheads claim that she was a straight man who cross-dressed for work. The mind boggles at how they can reach that conclusion when she clearly was not cisgender and presented female for her trial and her life. So in the interest of unerasure, she is included here, and you should spread the word about her too. Slide 18. Chevalier d'Eon. Chevalier d'Eon was an 18th century French spy, diplomat, and soldier. She had the genius idea to disguise her transgender identity by coming out as transgender. It'll make sense soon. In 1728, d'Eon was born at the Hotel d'Uzès in Tonnerre, Burgundy, into a poor noble family. Assigned male at birth, she excelled at school and in her military training and moved to Paris at an early age. By 35, she had been knighted and gained a law degree, published books on the French tax system, and became a celebrated fencer, as in swords. Following this, she joined the Secret du Roi, the secret network of the king's spies, and reported directly to Louis XV. After years of service, she was passed over for a promotion, so she published a tell-all book of the secrets of the king's spies. In her later years, she applied to be assigned female at birth, stating she was only assigned male to ensure she would inherit the family estate. This genius ruse paid off, and she was accepted by the French and British government. She was living in London at the time. Her gender was made official, and she lived her remaining 33 years completely free to be herself. Charlie Parkhurst, also known as One-Eyed Charlie, was a famous American rancher in the 1800s. He was born and raised in an orphanage in New England, but he ran away and changed his name before he turned 18. As many aspirational Americans did, he followed the gold rush out west and built a reputation as one of the greatest stagecoach drivers running over Mount Madonna on the west coast. He gained his nickname One-Eyed Charlie after he was kicked in the left eye by a horse that had been startled by a rattlesnake. Charlie was only outed after his death. Slide 19. Lucy Hicks Anderson, 1886 to 1954. Lucy was one of the earliest recorded demonstrators for marriage equality. She was born in 1886 in Kentucky. As a young child, she told her parents she wanted to be a girl and go by Lucy. They took her to the family doctor, who told them to respect her choices, so she transitioned with their full support. When she was older, she moved to California and married a man called Clarence Hicks, and they operated a brothel together. They divorced in 1929, and she later married a soldier called Reuben Anderson, who was stationed at Mitchellfield on Long Island, New York. Perjury charges were brought against her because she signed the marriage document, which swore that there were no legal objections to the marriage. Speaking to the press, she said, "I defy any doctor in the world to prove that I am not a woman. I have lived, dressed, acted just what I am, a woman." Sadly, she was found guilty of perjury, and later she was convicted of fraud because she had cashed checks she received from the government as a wife of a US soldier. Ellen L. Hart, 1890 to 1962. Ellen was a pioneering radiologist, a physician and tuberculosis researcher. His greatest work was arguably when he discovered that X-rays could be used to detect tuberculosis, saving countless lives worldwide. He attended medical school while presenting female, but transitioned soon after. While working as a doctor at a hospital in Oregon, he was recognized by one of his former classmates who outed him, and he was forced to leave. This was not the only time this happened to Allen, and it began to take its toll on him. Writing in his novel, The Undaunted, about a character called Sandy Farquhar, he wrote, "He had been driven from place to place, from job to job, for 15 years because of something he could not alter any more than he could change the colour of his eyes. Gossip, scandal, rumour always drove him on." He was also one of the first recorded trans men to receive gender-affirming surgery in the United States. Wilma Little Axe Broadnax, 1916 to 1992. Wilma Little Axe was a talented gospel quartet singer in the 20th century. He was born in 1916 in Texas and was taken with music from an early age. After moving to Southern California in the mid-1940s, Wilma and his brother William joined the Southern Gospel Singers. Later, William and Wilma formed the Five Trumpets. They were both lead singers, and Wilma was known for his powerful tenor voice. Following this, he performed with the Fairfield Four and the Five Blind Boys of Mississippi, before forming his own group called Little Axe and the Golden Echoes. He performed with his brother, who accepted and supported him through his life. Wilma trans identity was discovered after his death in 1992. Slide 20. Roberta Cowell, 1918 to 2011. A frontline Spitfire pilot during World War II, Roberta was an accomplished combatant on the battlefield who was captured by Nazi forces after anti-aircraft fire brought her plane down. She was later freed from captivity by the Red Army. Some years afterwards, she opted to become the first British woman to undergo gender reassignment surgery and finished out her life largely as a race car driver. Renee Richards, 1934, onwards. Capturing the attention of the media in 1976 when she was refused the ability to play at the US Open, Renee battled her case up to the New York Supreme Court, which ruled that even though she had been assigned male at birth, she would be permitted to play as her true gender, female. An outspoken person for equal rights of the transgender community, the ruling of the court has been instrumental in helping reduce bias and bigotry against those born with the incorrect gender. Sir Lady Java, 1943 on. Sir Lady Java, who's still active today, rose to fame in the 1960s as an entertainer and exotic dancer, renowned for her perfect hourglass shape. Born in 1943, she transitioned at an early age with the support of her mother and began dancing and singing in local nightclubs. In her 20s, she moved to Los Angeles and became associated with stars like Red Fox, Sammy Davis Jr., and Richard Pryor. She was performing at Red Fox's famous club, and it's rumoured that her and Davis Jr. were a couple for a while. In 1967, the LAPD began shutting down Java's famous performances, citing a local law prohibiting impersonation by means of costume or dress a person of the opposite sex. In response, she picketed the club and hired the American Civil Liberties Union to overturn the ruling. Slide 21. Marsha P. Johnson, 1945 to 1992. A bold civil rights leader and co-founder of STARS, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, Marsha aggressively battled against oppression and bigotry after the Stonewall Uprising, considered to be as instrumental to equal rights for transgender individuals as Martin Luther King Jr. was to rights for American Africans. She's best known for her famous statement that the P in her name stood for Pay It No Mind, which is also the title of a documentary about her life and works. Monica Helms, 1951 on. In 1999, Monica Helms created the transgender flag after she was encouraged by Michael Page, the creator of the bisexual flag, to design a flag to represent her community. The transgender flag has a palindromic design with 5 stripes. There are 2 light blue stripes to represent the traditional colour for boys, 2 pink stripes to represent the traditional colour for girls, and a white stripe in the middle for members who are transitioning, gender neutral. Helms debuted her flag in 2000 at a pride parade in Phoenix, Arizona. Over time, the flag was picked up by the transgender community and is now seen around the world, even as an emoji on iPhones and Android phones. Helms donated the original flag she made, and it can be seen at the Smithsonian. Slide 22. The curing of Australia's first transgender man in the 1800s. An Irish maid lived as a man in 19th century Melbourne for decades. The horrifying story of his discovery and treatment speaks to attitudes about transgender people that circulate to this day. Ellen Tremaine sailed from Ireland to Victoria in 1856. Though the 26-year-old Irish domestic servant was travelling alone, she brought along a trunk full of men's clothes labelled Edward de Lacy Evans. When Tremaine arrived, she found a job as a maid for a married couple in Bacchus Marsh, northwest of Melbourne. Tremaine soon left the job and travelled to Melbourne. While there, Tremaine transformed. He began using the name Edward de Lacy Evans, started dressing in men's clothes, and married. Evans went on to remarry twice, all while working as a miner and blacksmith around Australia's southeast. It seemed that Evans' maleness was accepted by both his wives and neighbours, though his fellow miners occasionally referred to him as Old Woman, suggesting that his physical womanhood might have been an open secret. Issues with his third marriage led Evans to gradually descend into a deep depression. In 1879, Evans was committed to the lunacy ward of the Bendigo Hospital and diagnosed with amentia, a general anachronistic term for mental illness. To avoid being discovered, Evans simply refused to bathe. After 6 weeks, however, he was moved to the Kew Asylum, a psychiatric hospital in the Melbourne suburbs. There he was stripped and his gender discovered. I was handed over to the women and they dressed me up in frocks and petticoats, Evans later said of the experience. Doctors diagnosed him with cerebral mania and mental weakness and offered him only female attire to wear. He refused to wear it or to eat for days at a time. Over the course of Evans' 3 months treatment, physicians subjected him to extensive vaginal and rectal probing, during which he reportedly sobbed and wept. Local sideshow operators offered the hospital £5 Australian a week to display Evans as an oddity. After his release, Evans did appear in one such travelling carnival, where sideshows billed him as the wonderful male impersonator, and a pamphlet about his life, The Man-Woman Mystery, was published in 1880. The news coverage in the immediate aftermath of the scandal speaks volumes about heteronormative sentiment in the late 1800s. Any kind of gender diversity was seen as, at best, a pathology and at worst, a crime. Other coverage promulgated the idea, which occasionally surfaces to this day, that transgender people are motivated by eroticism rather than by the feelings that they are trapped in the wrong body. One newspaper attributed his cross-dressing to nymphomania, writing, "It is evident that the woman must have been mad on the subject of sex from the time she left Ireland dressed as a woman," and later celebrated Evans' return to femininity after treatment. The fact that Evans had been discovered while in an asylum only bolstered the idea that he was mentally ill. It wasn't Evans' cross-dressing that so disturbed his contemporaries, but the fact that he had duped society and seemingly his own wives for so long. After Evans' release from the hospital, newspapers reported with satisfaction that he had returned to wearing dresses and looked quite feminine, and that he would not again attempt to unsex herself. In the end, Evans wasn't able to reap much of a fortune from his sideshow appearances. The following year, he moved into a Melbourne poorhouse where he went by Mrs. de Lacy Evans and lived for 21 years wearing drab, grey dresses and tended a garden until her demise.